This short video is going to look at Thomas Hobbes, the first key thinker of the conservative module, A-level politics, paper 3. Now, for some, Hobbes would not be seen as a conservative because of certain views that he would hold, particularly his idea of a social contract. However, writing in the 1650s, many of his ideas are shared by people who would identify themselves as conservative today. And his key text is Leviathan, published in 1651. So first of all, let's talk about the context of this text. Then we'll look at this frontispiece here and the messages within it. So 1651, Thomas Hobbes produces this text from exile in France. And the reason why he was living in exile in France is he had been a royalist in the English Civil War, and in 1649, King Charles I had been executed, and it was unsafe for Hobbes, or he certainly feared for his safety in England, and so moved to France. And many consider Leviathan as an instruction manual to his son Charles II, either if or when he retook the throne. Now, a Leviathan is a creature of the seas. It's this gigantic deep sea monster, and so you would expect that language to be used as a negative metaphor, but actually the term Leviathan is referring to what Hobbes believes is the necessity for an all-powerful sovereign. So in a time in England where the political elite, the parliamentarian forces, have overthrown the monarch and the concept of the monarchy in the House of Lords over this desire for greater freedom, Hobbes is actually arguing for the opposite, that a sovereign is needed to rule over the masses. And you can see the sovereign in the top half of the frontispiece of Leviathan. The sovereign is there. It's not the greatest quality picture, but the torso of the sovereign is made up of individuals. On his right hand, he holds a sword, and on his left hand, he holds a staff representing religious authority and superiority. But what's most interesting is the biblical quote above the sovereign's head. And from the book of Job, from Latin, it translates to, "There is no power on earth to be compared with him." So straight away we see what Hobbes believes the sovereign should be and should look like. For Hobbes, the sovereign should be all-powerful in all matters. And that is to keep humanity under control. For Hobbes, the English Civil War had been a sign of what the state of nature was like. And in a sense, I feel for Hobbes, because Leviathan is this incredibly long, detailed text, but people always narrow it down to one phrase. And Hobbes argued that in the absence of a sovereign, in the state of nature, when law and order is taken away from humanity, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So Hobbes is arguing the exact opposite of those who were arguing in favour of the execution of Charles I. Hobbes is arguing that when these power structures are taken away, our true human nature is revealed. And that is one of competitiveness and violence and selfishness and a descent into chaos. And that's what Hobbes believed England had signed up to when it had executed the king, abolished the monarchy and abolished the House of Lords, all in the name of greater freedom for the people. For Hobbes, taking away those figures of authority and those institutions of authority could only end in chaos. What I'm going to do now is try to summarise Hobbes' views on those four key concepts: human nature, state, society, and then finally the economy. We'll start with human nature because it links to the previous discussion. Remember that Hobbes is sceptical and negative of our human nature, and that phrase, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, is one that will always come back up when talking about how Hobbes views human beings in their natural state. We are fearful of one another, we are selfish, and we are competitive. And without an all-powerful state to keep us in check and to limit the very worst of human behaviour, without that, chaos will reign. But this next bit is why some don't consider Hobbes to be a conservative thinker, because conservatism was a reaction to the thinking of the Enlightenment. And Hobbes is actually buying into some Enlightenment ideas, particularly rationalism. Now, for Hobbes, it's not the same as Locke. Hobbes doesn't necessarily believe that we are all equally capable of rational thought, but he does argue that is a human quality, and that some individuals will see that the state of nature and absence of law and order and stability is not desirable, and will come together. Those warring factions will agree upon a social contract, and part of that social contract will agree that a social contract is needed to place an all-powerful sovereign in charge, and we'll move on to the sovereign in the state next. But the key thing for human nature for Hobbes is it's particularly negative and pessimistic, and that the state is there to deny the very worst of our human behaviour. So let's move on to the state in that case. For Hobbes, the state predates society. There is no functioning society prior to the creation of the sovereign. And the sovereign is the all-powerful head of government in all matters. And the sovereign will rule in the interests of those who are governed in order to create law and order and stability and peace. And so that is, as I said, why some don't consider Hobbes to be a conservative, because of that concept of a social contract which sort of predates the creation of the sovereign. Okay, let's then move on to society. And remember that, like Locke, Hobbes is talking about a state of nature, but it's far more negative than the state of nature identified by Locke. Remember that for Locke, the state of nature was imperfect, but something that could be built upon, whereas for Hobbes, the state of nature is where chaos reigns. And the creation of the state isn't a development of the state of nature, but sort of placing shackles upon it, because the state of nature is not somewhere where human beings can be productive. So, society can only thrive where order and stability and peace reign, and in order to do that, society must surrender itself in loyalty to the sovereign, an all-powerful ruler in all aspects of life. And it is only by doing that stability can reign. And then finally, we'll move on to the economy. Now, we know that conservatives have a defence of private property. And when we move on to Burke and other key thinkers, we'll see a development of these ideas. However, for Hobbes, the economy is again within the realm of the sovereign. The sovereign will dictate what is best for the economy and the subjects under their control, because the economy cannot function effectively without that stability that only the sovereign can provide. I hope that was helpful. Please don't think that 4 minutes or so is enough, but it's a starting point. It could either be the beginning of your work looking at Hobbes, or it could be a revision of his ideas. But do go back, use the key texts, look at the information that teachers have provided, both in and out of class, to sort of put meat on the bones, so to speak, because that there is the basics, the building blocks for Hobbes, and there'll be more videos on the other key thinkers coming soon too.